This week on Buffering, Amazon has agreed to buy Globalstar for just a small little amount of money, $12 billion. And US Mobile has partnered with Starlink to offer a $47 all-inclusive cellular/broadband plan.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about today, but to kick things off, I do want to say that if you're a CSP with questions and you want to learn more, or if you're just curious enough to email two marketers with microphones, send us an email at buffering@calix.com and we'd be happy to continue that conversation and engage with you.
I'm so excited that I feel so legit, Zach. We have a legit like email alias that people can send us emails now and ask questions. I'm pretty stoked on this. So yeah, if you've ever had burning questions, I mean, I was going to say burning food related questions, but Zach, I feel like everybody knows your food opinions and my food opinions at this point. But, food questions, broadband questions, business questions, feel free to email any of them at buffering@calix.com.
I have a good feeling our first email is going to be something related to Crumble.
Or maybe Hot Rod.
It's this inbox is just going to be me responding to like personal interest stories.
It's going to be so good. Well, I'm excited for this episode, Zach. We don't do a lot of like really specific broadband topical episodes, ironically. Even though we work in this industry, we tend to talk more about, marketing and marketing best practices and things like that. But there's just been so much happening in this space. And I think it's really important, especially with the acquisition that just happened this week, for us to kind of double down on, this specific topic, as I do see it as a huge threat for a lot of community service providers. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to dig into it in a bit more detail.
And the best part of this podcast episode is right now, someone listening is like, oh, we have fiber. This is satellite. We don't have to worry about that. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, because you could not be more wrong. But talking about this acquisition, I think, Gabe, this is Amazon's largest, or might be their second largest behind Whole Foods acquisition to date. And they tend to acquire very, do I say strategic or unique companies here?
Mhm.
And what this acquisition includes is spectrum licenses, the satellites, the Globalstar network that's already in place, which already has the device or the direct to device compatibility with mobile phones. So it's a pretty interesting acquisition here. The other interesting part of this acquisition is that Globalstar and Apple have collaborated in the past over the past several years on their satellite connectivity features. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes. And throughout this episode, we're going to talk about all of this as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just a further validation that Amazon is making a play into this space, and now they're rounding out the portfolio of solutions that they can offer to people. And again, we'll talk about this a bit more as we get into the episode, but this is where bundling and having the consumer buying power or consumer information that they have is going to be so powerful for them, because they're just layering on these additional services that are going to make it super easy to just have a relationship with Amazon. And to your point, well, and again, we'll talk about this too. Yes, fiber is a better technology. Satellite is always going to be inferior from a technological perspective. But if the end consumer doesn't really see the difference, does it matter?
Yeah, it's that good enough experience, which we will talk
Hmm.
about here. But I
Yep,
think the interesting thing with
exactly.
Leo too is they haven't launched any commercial product yet. It's supposed to be
Hmm.
coming here midsummer. So in the next few months, we should be learning more about this. But they've already signed on some pretty big name customers: Delta, American Airlines, I think it was, AT&T, the Australia NBN. We talked with a guest about that a few months ago. But they've been building all these connections and these partnerships and kind of touting their technologies, their speeds and whatnot before it's even become available. So it's going to be a very interesting summer as they launch this, or as they pilot this, as they test this, however they decide to do that, to see what actually happens from here.
Hmm. Yeah, and the airline partnerships are so interesting, because we talked about this a number of months ago, Zach, when I had my first experience with Starlink Wi-Fi on a United flight, and I was absolutely floored at how good it was. I sent you the screenshot because I was so curious. I ran a speed test from my computer while I was on this flight, and I got 450 meg down and like 50 meg up or something like that. Now, I realize I'm actually closer to the satellites when I'm in a plane than I am on the, at my home. So there's some benefits there, but it was really interesting to see the really positive experience. And the reality is there is going to be a halo effect that happens around, a positive halo effect that happens to Starlink because of that. And you're going to see the same thing with Amazon Leo, whether it's on the Delta flights or the American airline flights, those sorts of things. People are going to start to see it. They're going to start to experience it in a positive way, where airplane Wi-Fi has always sucked. It's always been terrible. Now, all of a sudden, they have this much better experience, and there are going to be people who start to look into it because of that.
And I want to build off that just a little bit here because this good enough dynamic that we've talked about here, it tends to accelerate in rural markets because of kind of what you just talked about is you might be used to this poor experience. Satellite Wi-Fi in a plane has always been garbage. Can I call out a specific company? GoGo has always had just terrible Wi-Fi service on planes. And
Terrible.
you expect that as a consumer. Back to the BSP space, if you're on DSL, if you're on spotty fixed wireless, you come to expect that. That poor
Yeah.
experience is suddenly being challenged. And from a marketing standpoint, your average consumer doesn't care about specs. We talk about this often. But as soon as they experience friction, you've got a problem. As soon as they see this experience or experience this, can I say experience this experience? Experience this, it's going to change their mind as well. And again, it goes back to even like the buyer flows we talk about so much.
Yes.
If buying satellite is easier than buying fiber, that alone matters. I've told the story on the podcast of during the pandemic, my modem went out and they had like a 2 or 3 week like lead time on replacing that. I was able to sign up for a fixed wireless cellular internet that day, and I received it that day. I know fixed wireless in that case was not the best solution for me, but it
Mhm.
got me connected that same day.
Yeah, I was actually, I didn't even tell you this. I was actually just doing some research on self-install best practices yesterday. And one of the things that came up in the research was the fixed wireless providers specifically. And when we say fixed wireless, we're talking more like the larger national providers that are, sending out these routers in the mail. What's interesting is that it's pretty much a self-install model, right? As you said. And that is something that is clearly seen as a positive by people. And I think what you're seeing in the satellite space is something very similar. If buying it is super easy, to your point, setting it up is super easy, and I can do that completely on my own, and I don't have to wait 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever to get hooked up with service, that is a reason why I might go with a quote unquote inferior product, an inferior solution, because I can get it faster and I can just handle everything myself. There's a lot of validity in why a consumer might want to do that on their own.
A few episodes ago, Gabe, we had Jeff Johnston on as well, and he made a comment saying there's no such thing as a bad product, only a bad price. And I think we should talk about that a little bit because that really does reframe this conversation as well.
Yeah, I love that quote from him. That was a really interesting episode where we talked a bit about Amazon on that episode as well. But he that reframing of not a bad product but a bad price. If you've got something again that's easy to buy, that's at a price point that makes sense, and that's obviously been one of the huge things that we've seen, especially with Starlink over the past really year, I guess, is them getting much more aggressive from a price perspective, lowering the barrier of entry for people by removing the hardware upfront hardware costs and those sorts of things, and now bundling it together with the mobile service that they have. All they're doing is removing that friction and making that price seem more attractive.
You know what's funny here, Gabe? And we'll talk about a little bit more satellite before we talk specifically about Amazon here. But this whole satellite versus fiber thing, we're already seeing this in the market, more so with like cellular providers versus fiber, right? And
hmm
this is again a technology that we know is not as good as fiber, yet it's growing. They're taking subscribers. How are they doing this? This satellite thing is just going to be a continuation of what we're already seeing. So I think the big
100%.
thing here is it's time to stop asking, is satellite better than fiber? Again, we know the answer, but ask, Is the difference in experience meaningful enough for the customer to justify paying or switching to another provider?
I love that framing. And to go back to your fixed wireless comment a moment ago, if you look at the fastest growing segment of the broadband space, it's fixed wireless. That's where the subscriber counts are growing very aggressively. A lot of that is being taken away from, I'll call it the legacy cable providers and those sorts of folks. But again, if you look at the space, that's where it's growing. And I think a huge portion of that is ease of purchase, ease of setup. And to go back to your previous comment, Zach, what is perceived as good enough for people versus what they've been paying for previously.
Yeah, I mean, summing that up, Gabe, if buying satellite is that much easier and that matters to the subscriber, and you can explain to a customer why your service is better in a way that resonates or makes more sense to them emotionally, not technically, do you really have much an advantage here? Because again, putting the fiber technology, that single strand, that's as thick as a single hair, we talked about that a lot too. What's your advantage here? But putting that aside here, Gabe, I know we want to talk a little bit more about Amazon here, and I'll hand it over to you to kind of kick this conversation off.
Well, I know you're handing it to me because I get to say margin, and
I
you
was
know
gonna
how I
say
love talking about
there's
finance related things.
by the way, I think you recommended this movie, but I keep seeing like YouTube shorts for the movie Margin Call, and
Oh, great movie.
every time I see those, I have to watch them, and I always think of just the whole financial mindset here, the Excel conversation. We geek out a little too much, but as soon as I saw Margin in there, I thought we'll let Gabe speak to that. I'll get the
Well,
second reference.
to close off on the margin call conversation, have you actually sat down and watched that whole movie? Because it is an
No,
absolutely
I've
delightful
only
movie.
seen the YouTube shorts, but I've seen so
Okay.
many of them, I could probably tell you what the movie's about.
You feel like you've seen the movie. I think the
I'm
most
pretty
famous one
confident.
is the like the CEO who's talking about how we're selling products to people at the fair market price. And oh gosh, that whole part of the that
And how
that guy
his
just
job was to
absolutely comes
listen to
in.
the music too,
Uh-huh.
if you remember that
Yes.
same
Yep.
scene.
Yep. Yeah, my job is to listen to where the music where the thing is going and listen to the music. Yeah. No, that guy comes in. I think he's only in the movie for like 10 minutes, but just absolutely crushes every scene that he's in. Anyway, I forget who the actor is. So it'll come to me at some point later on. Okay, not important for for this conversation. So the famous quote we want to talk about here is a Jeff Bezos quote. And he's famously said that your margin is my opportunity. And that is exactly what Amazon is building with the satellite product. They're building this prime subscription growth engine around these solutions that they're bringing to market. And they're willing to take a bit of a margin hit in order to sell all of these additional very high margin services that are built around connectivity.
It's it's such a bold quote. I kind of
I
like
know.
it, but I mean, think about what he's saying here, and going back to like the broadband example here, Gabe. It's the anchor that kind of unlocks the Amazon delivery economics, especially in these rural markets as well. Amazon doesn't need to make money on connectivity. I'd be very interested to see how this Leo, ROI plays out here, kind of thing. But they can use that connectivity to make money somewhere else within their business. And I think we've talked about this in the past too, but they're effectively creating this household operating system. They have Prime, they have, video, they've got delivery, they have Ring, they have Alexa. And then unfortunately for the subscriber, they also have Eero in that house as well. So combining all of these things makes it a pretty scary environment.
Yeah, well, it makes a pretty scary environment if you're a provider and a pretty compelling environment if you're a consumer where all of these things are coming together in a single ecosystem. It's interesting you say that about not really wanting to make money on this. I've always had this theory that when Google launched their broadband business, they had absolutely no interest in making money on it at all. They just wanted to force other companies to start to invest in fiber. Now, Google's actually gotten quite large. They're a very large broadband provider, and so maybe that decision has changed over time. But I think when they first launched, and this is just me speculating, but I really think what they were looking to do is just kind of spur some competition in the market because ultimately, what's good for Google? It's good for Google if people have a high level of connectivity, so they can connect to all of the services, really high margin services that Google wants to sell. in much the same way, we're talking about the same thing with Amazon. Amazon doesn't necessarily care if they make a ton of money on a LEO satellite service, but they absolutely care about getting your $200 a month, or $200 a year, I should say. I know the price has increased. It hasn't gone up that much. $200 a year for Amazon Prime. That's a crazy high margin solution for them.
I'm not a Prime customer, so I don't know what the price is, but I, I totally agree with you there, Gabe. But like, and I mentioned this kind of at the top of the podcast too, but there's another angle here that I'm interested in, and I think this is going to be a bit more speculation. But if we have this conversation again in 12 months, I mean, heck, I hope we have it in 6 months. But if we have this conversation again in 12 months, I would be willing to bet I'm right here. But uh, Apple, so they've partnered with some of these satellite providers here in the past to provide some high level satellite communications. T-Mobile and Starlink do this kind of on their own as well. But now with this partnership, it was specifically mentioned that they are going to expand this into, the Amazon Leo infrastructure. And the kind of scary thing here is that means that, details of this partnership to come, every iPhone will be sold to further the Amazon Leo distribution in some way.
Mhm.
What this looks like, we don't quite know, but we can guarantee here that we're going to see expansion of the features that exist today. So when Apple launched satellite, I think it was just satellite messaging, it
Mhm.
was, point your phone at the sky and you can send an SMS message or, communicate with emergency services. Well, then T-Mobile and Starlink came out. They expanded that, of course, from messaging to low data apps. So like the weather app, I think All Trails was on there. I mean, there's less than 10 or maybe a dozen or so that are on there, and it works. The weather app is kind of funny though, but me being out hiking with no cell signal, I tend to like those features. But it,
Yeah.
it, it kind of made me think though, Gabe, and I'd love your thoughts on this too. But I said, okay, could this partnership result in Amazon bundling iPhone connectivity features into Prime, into Leo? What does this Apple Amazon partnership look like? And again, I think we are going to learn more about this in 2 months. That's going to be my prediction here. In June, we're going to learn something more about what this looks like, if not, next June. But I think at Apple's developer conference, this is going to be a talking point in some fashion in the future.
No, I agree with you. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. And the it's almost all upside for them and very little downside, because the upside is somebody's life is saved because they were out hiking and they hurt themselves, and they fell down or whatever, and they were able to connect with emergency services. That's a very good thing. I think we can all agree with that. There also will be a whole bunch of PR that happens around that whenever some real life situations happen. In fact, didn't Apple run a commercial a couple of years ago that was real stories from customers that they made into a commercial of, like, I was in a car accident and my watch called emergency services. I can already see these ads that are coming in the future for this combined service.
Again, we talked about this at the start of the podcast, but when Apple announced their satellite connectivity features, they said, hey, free for 2 years, 3 years, whatever that time period was. And they just keep extending that. And
Mhm.
like I told you, that's at the end of the day, it's not a feature you can just shut off, or it's not a feature that you can say, hey, subscribe to iCloud because you'll get these features. I don't see that working because, again, if you're in those scenarios, it's going to look very bad. And I
Mhm.
just don't think it's worth it. I'd also be curious, though. I think I don't know about you, Gabe. I think I have a more unique use case of, hey, I've used satellite texting, not in an emergency scenario, but like I've used it when I don't have signal just to check in or let people know where the heck I am or what mountain peak I'm on that day. And it's been good. I'd be curious to know though how many people actually utilize that. Because I feel like, it's more of a good to have thing than like I need this everyday feature. But
For
um
sure. Feels like a corner case. That
yeah,
probably is
it's
not used a whole lot. But again, the positive
value
vibes
though.
around it, there is
Yeah.
value around it, and the positive vibes around it, I think, are very, well, positive, right?
I
Like
mean,
it's
Gabe,
only
I would argue,
beneficial.
there's an element of FOMO. I'll tell you
Mhm.
right now, my friends that have, T-Mobile and can connect to airline Wi-Fi until Starlink came into play, there was FOMO there. The fact that they can use some of these low data intensive apps, in areas that, non-subscribers would be able to, there's FOMO there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. More to come on this. We'll be continuing this conversation, but I think that the last thing I want to touch on here is just the technical limitations here. And we have to address this. I see it on Reddit all the time. And it makes me a little bit mad because, I mean, number one,
What?
Starlink
Reddit
has,
making you angry? Who could have seen this coming?
well, it's the less smart people on Reddit.
That was
I
the
can't,
nicest way you could have said that.
I couldn't figure out how to say that any better. But it's these people on Reddit that get on and like, oh, Starlink has 10,000 plus satellites. Amazon only has 200. They're never going to win. I disagree. Number one is yes, they're behind, if you will. Yes, they're needing to ramp up. Yes, they're going to need more time from the FCC to meet some of these requirements. But the trend line is clear. Having another competitor in this space is going to be a problem. Not so much a problem, for the consumer. More choices. There's going to be. We talked about like there's going to be this space feed and price battle that's going to break out. But I think one of the interesting things here, Gabe, is every year satellite gets cheaper, it gets better, it gets easier to buy. 10 years ago, like I can't imagine anyone was really talking about satellite internet. Like I think of some like these legacy providers where it's like get like half a meg,
Yeah,
up
yeah.
and down, and like
They were
that was
terrible
just
speeds.
that was the experience. And
Mhm.
and I think a lot of BSPs are waiting for satellite to hit a wall or deorbit, if you will, kind of thing, right? And the reality is this reversal trend isn't happening yet. It's not even on the horizon right now. And even though we know fiber is technically superior, people are buying these products and services from these satellite providers. And yeah,
Well, and I think people to lean on the technological limitations as a bit of a crutch. I, again, completely agree. Satellite is never going to be as good of a
yeah, no one,
service
we're not
as
going to
we're not,
disagree there.
we are. Yeah, exactly. We 100% agree that fiber is a better, more reliable service. However, if 10% of customers left a provider and went to a satellite provider, how impactful would that be to your business? Like that's a lot of customers potentially walking out the door. That's a lot of revenue walking out the door. We work in a very high cost of acquisition industry. It costs a lot of money to get people on board. And if you were to lose 10 or maybe 15% of your subscriber base, that could be really negatively impactful. You're not going to lose 100. It's never going to be a situation where everybody goes to Starlink or Amazon Leo or something like that. But even a small percentage there could be really negatively impactful from a financial perspective.
And why would you want to risk it? And by the way, Gabe, I feel like we have talked about this, and I think I made a comment about this later on in the podcast. So we'll kind of do it twice. But if if you have a customer who's been with you for 5+ years, I would say they're less likely to churn. But a lot of the risk is coming to these new subscribers. You might spend a lot to acquire these new subscribers, but if they're not happy after a month or 6 months or whatever that time frame may be, they are more likely to churn. And now they have these tech companies launching internet service. And again, we'll talk about this here in a minute. It can be very dangerous and accelerate that churn. Yeah, but the one last thing I want to talk about here before we talk about Starlink a little bit more with US Mobile is as a CSP, we know Amazon is building this, LEO satellite service. Maybe they bundle this into Prime. Maybe there's a discount. We don't know what the offering looks like yet, but knowing Amazon is launching this service, how do you compete? What are you going to do over the next 6 months, knowing that, even as soon as this summer, they might be signing up customers? And like I said, I think BSPs, they need to start competing for customer loyalty before you even acquire that subscriber. If you start, competing on loyalty after you acquire subscribers, I think you're already too late.
Agreed. You're kind of jumping around this, Zach, but I think the very direct question to ask people is, how would you respond to Amazon bundling internet into Prime for a discount? What is it that you would do to compete in that situation? And
And
that is
don't
a
say
question.
I have fiber.
Don't say I have fiber, and don't just immediately slash your price. Like there needs to be a real conversation that happens here. And that conversation should be happening now. Make yourself prepared for when that happens. So you're not fighting with, you're not fighting from a leaning back or on your, on your back heels or whatever, right? Like you need to be thinking about that stuff now.
That conversation should have happened back in the Kuiper days, before a single satellite was launched, before a single rocket was launched. That
Hmm.
conversation should have been happening. But looking forward, what are you going to do? Talking about Starlink and US Mobile, though, I
Yeah.
kind of alluded to this with like the Reddit example too, but there's so many people like, oh, Starlink's got the first mover advantage. They're going to win. We'll see. But over the past several years, Starlink has been offering satellite service, but they've been playing a different game than Amazon. And Gabe, we kind of talked about this, especially with like the Google Fiber example, but they don't have like Starlink doesn't have a Prime ecosystem. They don't have this household product portfolio. So if Amazon does something with Prime, which I mean, let's be honest, it'd kind of be foolish not to,
Hmm.
Starlink hasn't really taken that approach. They don't really have that opportunity. But what they do have is 10 million plus subscribers or whatever that number is. And for the past, I think 2 years, if not more, they've doubled their subscriber base every year.
Yep. Well, and now you're starting to see them put these partnerships together. It is a different product because they don't have all the consumer information that Amazon is going to have. So they have to think about it in a bit of a different way. So to the conversation earlier, now they have this partnership with US Mobile. They're offering that service for $30 a month with free hardware. So they're completely removing the barrier to entry that a lot of people had with Starlink in the past, where it was like, oh man, I don't want to pay $400 or $500 for all the hardware, to get this up front. They've completely removed that with this partnership that they have and started to bundle these additional services together.
Well, not only is it $30 a month for Starlink, but your total bill, one single bill, is $47 a month because it includes a line of service.
Hmm.
And that's just on like the minimum plan. Like you can go up from there kind of thing. But the ease of buying Starlink, and I have to tell you my conspiracy here. My conspiracy is that part of this US mobile deal and part of the acquisition offers we're seeing from Starlink is to drive subscriber counts up prior to their IPO. That's my
Fair.
hypothesis here, because
Yeah.
even on the promo pricing on that, it said like Starlink pricing for 6 months or like this pricing for 12 months, which brings the question of, well, what happens after that, promotional period? I mean, we've seen this with some of the big providers where they
Mhm.
almost double or they do double their pricing after that promotional period. So this one I'm going to be keeping a close eye on after the next 6 months to see where this goes.
I think it's a very fair assumption. And the reality is that for the large public service providers, the number that people always ask about and the way that they're valued is subscriber count. And it's why you see them constantly talking about subscriber count as the first and pretty much only metric that gets discussed. I shouldn't say only metric, but it's certainly the primary metric that gets discussed. I mean, you and I are nerdy like this. We actually read through the quarterly releases of the large providers, or at least we have AI do it for us now and give us a summary. But the thing that's always discussed in that first couple of sentences is how many subscribers did you add or how many did you lose? And often the value of the stock is going to be directly impacted by what that number is, whether it's a positive or negative number.
Yeah, and one of the other things here with Starlink we've talked about is the ease of purchasing. Early on in the podcast today, we talked about how that's a huge difference. I feel like that's a bigger differentiator than people actually think. But the fact that you can go to somewhere like Home Depot, I know, Walmart in some cases, Best Buy, you can go buy Starlink today. If you live in some of these, test areas where they've got the vending machines or like the actual Starlink retail store, you
Mhm.
can go in, take it home, plug it in, and you have service with no install and no service window, which actually does sound pretty nice. We've talked about like the 48-hour install windows in the past here, but the
Yeah.
the experience, is ultimately the competitive differentiator, whether that's, the experience of buying, on the website or buying it where you may be, taking it home setting up.
Or two clicks on this bad boy, maybe one
Exactly.
click,
Yeah.
right? With Apple Pay.
The
We've
the
talked about that in
website.
the past, being able to really rapidly purchase it from your phone, via Apple Pay.
That's a huge differentiator, and
Mhm.
I think whether the product is technically inferior or not in this case, again, we know the limitations of satellite, but if you can do a double tap on your phone with Apple Pay, um, buy Starlink and have that shipped or whatever, your kind of choice may be, that's a huge, huge touch point within your customer experience. And by the way, that's probably the first and only interaction many people have.
For sure. Well, let's not just be a bummer and talk about all the negatives,
Yeah,
Zach. Let's talk about what
this
we can
sucks.
do.
Now,
This sucks. You
what?
can't do anything. You know?
Yeah,
No,
man,
no. We
here we are. But I mean, let's circle it back, Gabe, to the question I asked. If you're a communication service provider, if Amazon launches in 3 to 6 months, what is the first thing you would do?
well, first of all, I have to stop competing on specs and start competing on a story. The fiber is better is not a brand, or not a brand that is going to allow you to compete with a company like Amazon. So I would be thinking really deeply about how I'm framing up my services for my customer. What is the story that I am telling to them in in my website, when they're searching for me on, whether that's in traditional search or an AI search? What are those stories that they're building, and how do I start to lead them down this path of understanding that my services are going to be better, not because they're fiber, but because I've really thought deeply about how they're actually going to use that service.
And the story, should be on experience here, Gabe, but also reliability. I think local accountability as well, making your service easy to buy. We kind of joked about this earlier today in a team chat we had, but saying to a subscriber, to a prospect, that they have to call you during business hours, that is a huge competitive liability. It's huge. And I think with the AI era too, there's a lot that can be done there as well. But even going back to like the local accountability component, we've also talked about being that local provider, owning that narrative. Starlink and Amazon are never going to sponsor, I shouldn't say never going, they're not going to sponsor your local fair, be that local, in the community, investing in our community. We care about the community. But if you are that local, I mean, you could have that as an advantage. You really lean into that. You have to own that. You can't just
Mhm.
say we've been here since 1950 or whatever that may be. Own it. Really lean into being that local provider. And
Yeah.
and speaking of owning that, own your customer experience. And this is something I think is interesting here as well, Gabe. But these are tech giants launching these satellites, Amazon, SpaceX. They can undercut you on price. They can't replicate a truck that will show up, or have your local experienced staff. But being tech companies, I think they can be pretty flexible and adaptable with their entire e-commerce solution, what it looks like to buy service from your website, how it gets to you. I think they've got a little bit of an advantage there. That's not to say BSPs or CSPs can't compete, but you need to keep that in mind, as if you're requiring people to call in, or if your buyer flow is clunky, these tech companies largely don't have those problems.
To me, it's what are the things that you can take that they're doing well and bring back to the business, the business that you've built, and take those, those more, digital touch points, whether that be, they're thinking about the customer journey longer term, and what are these touch points that are going to be? How do I send text messages? How do I send, really timely segmented emails? That's what Amazon's really good at. That's what Tesla and Starlink are going to be really good at. A tech company is going to be really good at looking at all of these digital signals and figuring out what those meaningful touch points are across that digital journey. Well, take those things and bring them back into your business as well as the local provider. Still do the local stuff, but also think about what are all of those other touch points that need to happen throughout the entire journey.
If you're listening to this episode, I think you've got to like finish the episode number one. Don't just bounce, but go back and listen to last week's episode. We talked about using AI to build things. Part of that, Gabe, was using publicly available data, using data you have. Maybe you have the tools and solutions, that bring in some demographic and behavioral data today, but combine these data sources and build that. Gabe, we made a checkout flow. You made that quiz that would adapt based on your responses. We built the address lookup to identify outdoor Wi-Fi candidates or mesh candidates and things like
Mhm.
that. These are things that those companies, these tech companies, are going to be very interested in. Of course, they have the resources to do that as well. So maybe you use AI to compete with said resources. But these are opportunities that I think people should be getting out ahead of today. We did that episode last week to talk about, what you can build. Start thinking about those ideas. I think we mentioned that in the episode. Think about what a good idea or what a good gap might be, something that could improve a process or improve your upsells, and get ahead of Amazon, get ahead of
Mhm.
Starlink or these fixed wireless, cellular providers that are creeping into territory now as well.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I hear this all the time of, from providers that I talk to of, well, we've had this person for 3 or 4 years. We don't want to bother them. We don't want to feel like, we don't want them to feel like we're, just trying to get an additional few dollars out of them. It's not about that. It's about what the experience, how their experience needs to change. Leverage the data and insight that you have to go back to those customers that are longer term customers of yours, and think about how their life has probably changed over 3 or 4 years and what service they might need now. It's not being pushy. It's not trying to get an additional $5 out of them. It's about right sizing them into something that makes sense based on their lifestyle now. And if you're not doing that with your longer term tenured customers, eventually they are going to bounce and they're going to go find another provider who will, match what they need.
I love that quote there, Gabe. You said, I don't want to bother them, hypothetically speaking with these BSPs, but what's going to bother me is if I have to call in and cancel, or if I have to suffer through a less than ideal experience. Meanwhile, my BSP knows about this, or they've got the data to make this right, but they haven't done anything about it. I mean, like I said, when I replaced my modem during COVID, a little bit different story there, but the experience of having to resolve this in the timeline was enough that I threw all loyalty out the window, went and got internet same day, and kept it until I moved. So I think a lot more to talk about with what Amazon and what we're going to see here over the next few months. But to kind of close out the podcast here, a few things to keep in mind. Number one, satellite internet is not going to beat fiber on a spec sheet. We've talked about that. We beat that stick with a dead horse. But moving on, I love saying that wrong. It's a,
Every time you say
well,
it wrong, I was like, I think he said that wrong. But then I realized that you're on
it's
purpose
more of an
saying it wrong.
inside joke because I said it wrong unintentionally on a call once, and like two of our colleagues were cracking up on the side. And of course, this was a conversation with some of our C-level leadership, but I stand by it. I think it's funny now, so I'll lean into it. But the other thing here is Amazon Leo, they're not going to win every market, next year. Are they coming for every market? Probably. But again, the quote we started the podcast with here, with Jeff Bezos, your margin is my opportunity. He means that, or the current the current Amazon leadership means that they're going to lean into that. They're going to be very competitive with someone like SpaceX and Starlink, and what that means for the legacy, broadband provider on the ground is a mystery right now. But there's so many action items we can take today to kind of protect your market, continue to grow, and retain your healthy margins. Amazon might have this infinite capital, a reputable brand, a bundle that already lives in everyone's homes. So you have to keep all of this in mind. And again, this is not like some threat that's a ways down the road. This could be months out at this point, Gabe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and we're seeing it. I think we're seeing it with Starlink. And Zach, you and I have conversations with a lot of providers who are actively losing subscribers to Starlink right now. And, this is a threat that started to build a year or two ago and now is starting to really have a negative impact on some of these companies. That Amazon threat is going to continue to, move down this path as well. So, again, the question isn't whether satellite can technically compete with fiber. It's whether your customers will care about the difference enough to stay.
Gabe, I think this is a fantastic episode. I've been waiting to talk about this topic since the news broke earlier this week here. Um, I mean, the question you just asked there, like I said earlier on in the podcast, it's time to start addressing these things now before your subscribers have that additional option. Not after, not until they churn. We need to be very proactive in what we're doing. And like I said, what would we do today, knowing Amazon's launching in 3 months, 6 months, whatever that may be? Again, forget that they only have 300 satellites today. They're going to ramp that up. They're going to, work with the FCC on any deadlines and implications there. Starlink is already a threat. Keep that in mind as well. So I think there's going to be this pretty major shift in the industry over the next few months. It's just getting started.
Yep. Agreed. Oh, and we made it, man. I was going to tell you this or maybe I did tell you this at the beginning of the episode and I forgot. I'm like dying with allergies today. It has been crazy windy the last 2 days here. And I have this nice big glass door that sits in my office. And I have these lovely olive trees that sit right next to my office.
Oh no.
They're wonderful. I love these olive trees. They're beautiful. But this is the time of year that they're flowering like crazy, and I'm legitimately watching pollen just fly by my window as like dust in the wind just passing by. And I'm going, I wonder why I feel like crap today. And then I look out the window and see the pollen floating
Are
by,
you gonna
and I'm
like?
quickly
Are you gonna like?
reminded.
You're gonna like sprint back into your house, like trying to avoid the pollen.
Seriously. Yeah, I have to run very quickly from my office to my house to expose myself. We have my wife's family's coming over tonight for dinner, and right
I'm
before I jumped
sorry.
on the podcast to record with you, she says, "Can we eat outside tonight?" And I'm like,
Oh, just
okay. Like, I feel like crap, but sure, we'll eat outside. It'll
that's
be fine.
That's well, Gabe, good luck eating outside tonight.
Yeah.
And just a reminder for everyone, be sure to email us at buffering@calix.com if you're a communication service provider and want to continue these conversations. And if you did
Or
enjoy
if you
this
have any good
episode,
tips for dealing with allergies, I'll take those too. So,
before I wrap this up now, I thought about this halfway through the podcast, but after you mentioned AI, Gabe, I was like, okay, we've talked about AI, we've talked about Crumble, you mentioned Hot Rod. Do you think people like bet on these episodes? Like, do people listen to buffering and say like, "Oh, Zach's gonna mention Crumble today"? I know. Like, there's got to be a market out
buffering
there for this.
bingo,
Yeah.
buffering bingo card. Yeah, like yeah, that makes sense. Or over under how many times is Crumble going to get mentioned on this episode?
Oh my goodness, it could be a fun competition. I don't know the legality of that, but we'll avoid that and everyone be responsible here. But thank you everyone for tuning in to Buffering. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and to share with your friends and colleagues. And for more insights and updates, be sure to connect with Gabe and I on LinkedIn.